Sometimes the truth reveals itself only when the noise quiets down. When a woman rejects a man, especially in moments when she is overwhelmed, uncertain, or emotionally conflicted, her decision may feel firm in that instant. But emotional decisions are rarely final. Once the dust settles and she gains some distance from the situation, clarity begins to rise. Distance has a way of removing emotional fog. It allows her to look at the situation from a different altitude, one where she can finally see what she couldn't see before. In the immediate moment of rejection, she may have felt sure of herself. She may have believed she knew what she wanted, or convinced herself that she didn't want him. But human emotion is fluid. It shifts with time, with new experiences, and with a deeper understanding of oneself. When she steps away, when the pressure is gone, when she is no longer trying to protect her ego or defend her decisions, she enters a softer emotional space. In that space, she begins to reassess. This reassessment often comes quietly. It comes when she's alone, away from opinions and expectations. It comes in small reflections, when she remembers how effortlessly she could talk to him, how grounded his presence felt, how sincere his energy was. It comes when she realizes that the reasons she gave for rejecting him were influenced by stress, fear, or temporary assumptions that no longer feel accurate in hindsight. Psychologically, distance creates perspective. It activates a different part of the mind, one that is more reflective than reactive. Instead of responding to immediate feelings, she begins to examine the deeper layers underneath. Was she afraid of vulnerability? Was she unsure of her own readiness? Did she project past experiences onto him, or did she simply not take the time to see him clearly? This is where emotional reassessment becomes powerful. She starts to understand that her initial judgment may have been incomplete. Not wrong necessarily, but incomplete. And in that growing awareness, she starts reconsidering who he is, not from a place of urgency, but from a place of honesty. There's also something profoundly human about realizing what you may have overlooked. Sometimes she rejected him not because he lacked value, but because she lacked clarity. She may have been distracted, overwhelmed, or caught in the turbulence of her own personal growth. But once she steps away from the moment, she gains the emotional space to see the nuance, to notice what she missed. And this is where the shift happens. She begins to feel curiosity again. Curiosity about him, about the connection, about the possibilities she didn't fully explore. Curiosity is often the first sign that her heart is opening back up, not because she wants to undo the rejection, but because she wants to understand the truth of her feelings rather than the impulse of the moment. When a woman comes back after rejecting a man, it isn't always about regret. Sometimes it's about clarity. Sometimes it's about recognizing that her initial decision was made from a place she has since outgrown. Sometimes it's about realizing that the emotional landscape she once stood on has shifted, and now she can see him differently. Distance doesn't always change the truth, but it changes the lens through which she views it. And with a clearer lens, she begins to acknowledge the value of what she once pushed away. So the message becomes simple but profound. Distance creates clarity, and clarity can reveal what the heart wasn't ready to see the first time around. There's a moment, often subtle but deeply revealing, when a woman begins to look back on a man she once dismissed and realizes that her perception of him wasn't as accurate as she believed. Sometimes, rejection isn't rooted in a man's shortcomings. It's rooted in her inability to see his value clearly in the moment. Life has a way of clouding vision when emotions are tangled, when distractions are loud, or when expectations overshadow reality. And when she steps into new experiences, when she encounters people who don't offer the same stability, sincerity, or emotional grounding, a different kind of clarity begins to emerge. You see, value isn't always loud. It doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it shows up in quiet dependability, in the way a man listens without rushing to fix, in the calmness he brings, in the steadiness of his intentions. But in a world where noise is mistaken for depth and excitement is mistaken for compatibility, subtle value can be overlooked. She may have rejected him thinking she was choosing better, choosing differently, or choosing what felt more familiar. But familiarity is not always healthy, and excitement is not always meaningful. With time and contrast, she begins to notice that the qualities he possessed, the ones she didn't fully appreciate, are the same qualities missing in the people she meets afterward. It's not about comparing men. It's about recognizing what she previously underestimated. The emotional maturity he carried, the respect he showed, the way he communicated with intention instead of ego, all of that begins to stand out once she experiences its absence. Psychologically, this is rooted in a simple truth. We only understand the weight of something when we no longer feel it. Emotional safety, consistency, and genuine respect often become invisible when they're present, but unmistakable when they're gone. She starts to understand that what she thought was ordinary was actually rare. The way he made her feel heard, the way he held space for her without demanding anything in return, the way he showed his interest with clarity rather than confusion. These things begin to look different in hindsight, and it's in that hindsight that her mind begins retracing old steps. Not because she's stuck in the past, but because she's seeing it through more mature eyes. She realizes that the rejection may have been less about him and more about the emotional lens she was using at the time. Maybe she was guarding herself. Maybe she was chasing a version of love shaped by old wounds. Maybe she simply didn't believe she was ready, and instead of saying that, she said no. But life always teaches through experience, and when she encounters people who are inconsistent, unavailable, or emotionally evasive, she begins to grasp the depth of what he offered. She begins to feel the difference between someone who is truly ready to build and someone who is only passing time. This isn't about regret, it's about recognition. Recognition that stability is not boring, that emotional maturity is not predictable, that a man's kindness is not weakness. These are the very foundations of the love she claimed she wanted, and that recognition becomes the doorway back. Not because she suddenly needs him, but because she finally sees him. She sees the version of him she was too distracted or too unsure to acknowledge before. She sees that he didn't just bring affection, he brought substance. He brought peace. He brought qualities that stand up to time, pressure, and real life challenges. So when a woman returns after rejecting a man, it's often because time has revealed what her emotions obscured. She isn't coming back to rewrite the past. She's coming back because she now understands what her heart couldn't recognize. And the message here is powerful. Never underestimate the value you bring simply because it wasn't seen immediately. Real value is often recognized slowly, especially by those who are learning how to recognize what's truly good for them. There's a shift that happens inside the human heart when something that once felt easily accessible suddenly becomes distant. It's almost instinctive. When a woman believes a man will always be there, waiting, hoping, trying, she may feel no urgency to reconsider her decision. But the moment she senses that his energy has changed, that his attention is no longer directed toward her, something deep within her psychology begins to stir. It's not manipulation and it's not strategy. It's the awakening that happens when scarcity replaces certainty. Human beings, by nature, respond to loss far more intensely than they respond to gain. This is a principle you'll find in psychology, economics, and everyday relationships. When he was available, when his kindness and interest were constants, she could afford to take it for granted. She could afford to say no, to push him away, to assume he'd still be there if she ever chose to return. But when he steps back, when he begins to build his life without her at the center, she feels the shift, and that shift often makes her reevaluate not just him, but herself. This is where curiosity begins. She starts wondering why he's not reaching out. She notices that his attention, which once felt guaranteed, is no longer something she can rely on. She begins to pay attention to his growth, his confidence, his progress, and she realizes that the version of him she rejected is not the version she sees now. And psychologically, that creates a sense of urgency. It's not because she suddenly needs him. It's because she is recognizing that he has evolved into someone others could value deeply. Scarcity does something important, it forces clarity. When she thought he'd always be available, she could maintain emotional distance. But when she sees him directing his energy toward new goals, new relationships, new possibilities, she begins to understand that she miscalculated his value. That sense of loss, even if she never had him fully, can be powerful. It makes her ask different questions. Did she misjudge him? Did she walk away too quickly? Did she fail to see his potential? It's in these quiet moments of reflection that desire begins to reawaken. There is also the psychological effect of disrupted expectations. When she rejected him, she expected him to remain emotionally anchored to her. She expected some part of his longing to linger. But when he moves on, when he truly embraces his own growth, he breaks the pattern. And when a pattern breaks, the human mind tries to reestablish it. That's why she might circle back. Not to recreate the past, but to understand the present. And let's be honest, confidence is magnetic. Purpose is magnetic. Emotional independence is magnetic. When he starts showing up differently, not chasing but choosing, not waiting but evolving, it shifts the entire dynamic. Suddenly, she's not looking at the man she rejected. She's looking at a man who has stepped into himself. And that is often the moment she begins to feel the pull. This pull isn't always romantic. Sometimes it's simply the realization that she underestimated his potential. Sometimes it's admiration mixed with regret. Sometimes it's the recognition that her decision was made before he became who he is now. But whatever form it takes, it comes from the sudden awareness that he is no longer hers to dismiss. And that's the beauty and the lesson of this journey. People respond differently when they realize they are not the center of someone's emotional world anymore. It humbles the ego. It awakens the heart. It reshapes perspective. So when a woman returns after rejecting a man, it is often because the loss of guaranteed access opened her eyes to the presence she once overlooked. And the message this leaves us with is clear: never dim your value for the sake of being chosen. When you elevate yourself, the world begins to see you differently, including those who once thought they could do without you. There comes a moment in every human relationship, romantic or otherwise, when the balance of energy becomes impossible to ignore. And one of the most profound shifts happens when a man who once placed a woman at the center of his emotional world decides, consciously or quietly, to reclaim that space for himself. When he stops pouring from an empty cup, when he starts honoring his own needs, his own peace, his own sense of direction, something powerful begins to take shape. Not just within him, but within the woman who once turned him away. Because when a person begins to reinvest in themselves, They create a force field of confidence and presence that others cannot help but notice. The most compelling transformations are not loud. They don't announce themselves. They don't demand attention. They simply unfold. A man who was once waiting, hoping, clinging to an idea of what could have been, begins to redirect that energy toward becoming who he was always meant to be. He starts choosing experiences that expand him. He leans into work that challenges him. He cultivates friendships that nourish him. Little by little, he stops living with an emotional deficit and begins living with emotional clarity. And women feel that. They notice the difference between a man trying to win them and a man trying to win in life. The energy is entirely different. One feels dependent, the other feels grounded. One seeks approval, the other exudes purpose. And purpose, whenever it is present, always calls attention. When she sees him evolving, not out of spite, not out of game playing, but out of genuine self-respect, she begins to look at him through a new lens. She witnesses the discipline he's building. She sees the emotional steadiness replacing the old vulnerability that once made him so easy to dismiss. She recognizes that his world is getting bigger, and hers may not be the center of it anymore. That realization alone has a way of softening even the most certain judgment. There is also a deeper psychological truth at play. People reassess others when they witness growth they did not expect. It challenges their assumptions. It disrupts the version of the story they told themselves. When she rejected him, she believed she understood him, his desires, his insecurities, his limitations. But when he evolves, that narrative collapses. She is left to confront the possibility that she misread him, that the man she once considered not enough has become someone she now finds intriguing, admirable, or even desirable. And that revaluation is not rooted in regret alone. It's rooted in a universal truth: human beings are drawn to those who rise. A person who takes ownership of their life, who grows with intention and integrity, becomes a mirror that reflects what others could become themselves. And in that reflection, a woman who once passed him over may see her own missed opportunity, not simply for love, but for alignment with someone who is actively expanding rather than shrinking. What makes this shift so meaningful is that it's not about trying to provoke her return. It's not about winning her back or proving her wrong. His evolution stands on its own. It has its own purpose. And that purpose, ironically, becomes the very thing that makes her reconsider him, not because he needs her, but because he no longer does. This is the paradox of self-growth. The moment you stop chasing validation, you become someone people naturally gravitate toward. When a man steps into his own light, those who once overlooked him cannot help but feel its warmth. And the message waiting at the end of all this is simple and profound. The strongest attraction you will ever create is becoming the best version of yourself. Let your growth speak so powerfully that those who doubted you can no longer recognize the man you used to be.